My parents gave my entire $100,000 inheritance to my sister for her business. Now that it has failed, they expect me to bail them out. My name is Emma, and I'm a 32-year-old living a fairly modest life, working a steady job and renting a small apartment in the city. Nothing extravagant, but enough to keep me comfortable and independent. My parents, on the other hand, have always emphasized family unity, though in a way that seems more controlling than nurturing. Growing up, my sister and I had our share of sibling rivalry, but it was overshadowed by how differently our parents treated us. She was the golden child who could do no wrong. Her whims often became family projects, while I quietly learned to sustain myself. Years ago, after our grandmother passed away, she left a sizable inheritance meant to be shared between me and my sister. The legal documents were clear: we'd each get $100,000. But my father explained that, for the sake of the family, the money would be allocated responsibly. I was in my early 20s then, trying to figure out my path. My father told me not to worry, that my portion was safe and would be there when I needed it. He insisted on holding it for me, claiming it was to prevent reckless spending. I was naive and trusted him. My sister, though, quickly started hinting at a big plan for a future business, some boutique or cafe. The details shifted daily, but I suspected she wanted the inheritance. My parents, particularly my mother, gushed over her entrepreneurial spirit. Meanwhile, I was left in the dark about when I'd receive my portion. When I asked, I was brushed off with, "We'll discuss it when you're ready for something stable." I had no reason to suspect wrongdoing. I believed them when they said my share was safe. Time marched on. My sister launched her business with great fanfare, a fancy boutique in a busy part of town. I later discovered it had been financed entirely by the $100,000 inheritance, plus additional contributions from our parents. I was never consulted. I only found out by accident, overhearing a conversation. Furious, I confronted my parents. "You used my inheritance to fund her business." They waved it off, claiming it was a loan and that, once the boutique thrived, she would repay me. My mother said, "Think of it as helping your sister stand on her feet. You're not even settled yet, so this is an investment for the family." My jaw clenched. Legally, I had a right to that money, but I had never taken direct possession of it. My father insisted it was a sure thing, that the store would succeed and I'd see my money doubled. My sister, in her usual grand style, bragged about how the boutique would revolutionize local fashion, promising me a cut of the profits if I stayed patient. I felt uneasy. My sister's track record wasn't exactly stellar, but I wasn't ready for a huge fight. So, I swallowed my anger and hoped they were right, that it would pay off. At first, the boutique opened with a splashy event, local press coverage, fancy invites. My sister boasted about expansion plans within a year. My parents beamed with pride, praising her success. Meanwhile, I trudged along in my job, occasionally feeling pangs of resentment. That $100,000 was supposed to be for my own future, a down payment on a house, a cushion while I explored my ambitions. Instead, it was fueling her store. But I let it slide, telling myself I'd get my share back eventually. Months passed, and rumors started swirling that the boutique was hemorrhaging money. My sister's lavish spending overshadowed modest sales. She had overstocked expensive merchandise that no one was buying. I visited once and saw racks of items collecting dust, bored employees leaning behind the counter. It reeked of mismanagement. My father, who had poured in additional funds, refused to hear any critique. "She just needs time," he insisted. But I sensed a looming crash. Sure enough, about a year later, the boutique folded. My sister closed shop abruptly, leaving huge debts trailing behind her. Customers demanded refunds for orders that never arrived, suppliers claimed unpaid bills, and the landlord demanded back rent. My $100,000 was gone, swallowed by her ill-fated enterprise. My father approached me with a solemn face, muttering something about unforeseen circumstances, and offering half-baked promises of restitution. But with the store dead, there were no profits, just a black hole of losses. I spiraled into anger and bitterness. I confronted my sister directly, demanding an explanation, and my inheritance. She glibly said, "I'm sorry the business didn't work out. Money's gone." She acted as if it was an unfortunate accident, ignoring the fact that I had never consented to hand over my share. I demanded she make a plan to repay me. She scoffed. "With what? I'm broke." My parents tried to broker peace, urging me to understand, saying it was all for the family's good and that no one could have predicted the failure. I reeled at their gall. They had used my money without permission, lost it, and expected me to just shrug it off. Hurt smoldered within me. I had 1,000 better uses for that $100,000. Now, it was gone, with zero restitution. Even though I wanted to push for legal action, the inheritance had never been transferred to me directly. Legally, it was tricky, since the funds were in my father's or mother's name. I realized I was stuck. My only choices were to accept the loss or stir up an ugly family lawsuit. I debated but ultimately decided not to go nuclear. The heartbreak might overshadow any gains. So, I distanced myself from them, made it clear that I felt betrayed. Over time, we barely spoke, tension overshadowing any family gathering. My father would occasionally mention, "We'll fix this," but I never produced a dime for them again. Instead, I channeled my frustration into building my own life. I advanced in my job, saved diligently, and pushed aside any lingering guilt about abandoning my parents. Meanwhile, my sister continued to mooch off them, apparently refusing to find stable work after her failed business venture. Time passed, and I tried not to dwell on the lost inheritance. I buried it as a painful memory, wondering if they would ever repay something, maybe not. I focused on moving forward. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my father. He sounded frantic, saying my sister was in a dire predicament. Her bills had piled up, and she wanted to try starting another business to bounce back. My father strongly suggested that I help financially. "She's your sister," he pleaded. "We're family. Can you contribute or sign a loan for her?" My mind reeled. They had the nerve to ask for more money after taking my entire inheritance. "Absolutely not," I replied, reminding him that they had already taken my $100,000, which was never returned. He got offensive, arguing that family must help each other in times of crisis. I shot back that they had already used up my portion, and if they needed more funds, they could figure it out themselves. Later, my mother texted me, trying to appeal to my emotions. She claimed my sister was devastated and needed a second chance. I ignored her messages, refusing to be drawn back in. Enough was enough. Suddenly, they changed tactics. My father claimed they had found a great new business plan that would recoup all their losses. My mother tried sweet-talking me, saying that my sister regretted everything and had learned her lesson. The entitlement was staggering. They expected me to just give them more money or risk being labeled selfish. I stayed firm, telling them I wanted no part of it. My father muttered warnings of family estrangement if I didn't help. I accepted that if they intended to push me away for refusing to fund my sister's business again, so be it. The tension finally came to a head at a small family event. My father and mother had convinced me to come for a quick lunch, claiming they just wanted to talk. Turns out, it was an ambush. My sister was there, her eyes swollen from tears. She launched into a speech about how she needed a bailout. Tearfully, she insisted she was sorry for losing my inheritance, but circumstances had been harsh. She tried to guilt-trip me, saying only I could rescue her. Then, she threw in an emotional line, asking, "What would Grandma want?" as if that dear woman would want me fleeced again. I kept my composure, though my heart pounded. "I have no intention of giving you more money," I said calmly. The meltdown that followed was epic. My father raged about me turning my back on the family. My mother shook her head, calling me ungrateful. My sister went from begging to cursing, accusing me of letting them all suffer. But I stood firm. 8 years of bitterness fueled my resolve. They had used my inheritance for my sister's failed business once, they wouldn't get a second chance. After that, I cut contact with them. But the drama didn't end there. Apparently, my sister spread rumors among extended family, portraying me as a selfish person who hoarded resources. She left out the part about devouring my rightful inheritance. Some gullible relatives called me, questioning if it was true. I set them straight, explaining how my parents had misused my inheritance to fund my sister's business. Most were shocked, some were outraged on my behalf, while a few remained neutral, not wanting to pick sides. But the friction within the family continued. My parents doubled down, claiming they were forced to use my share to help my sister. They even absurdly argued that I had agreed in principle to this arrangement. The situation escalated further. My father left me a voicemail, saying they expected me to do the right thing or face permanent estrangement. My mother sent a snarky letter accusing me of turning my back on them in their old age and of being heartless toward my sister. Their sense of entitlement was mind-blowing. They wanted me to bail them all out again, completely ignoring the fiasco that cost me my inheritance in the first place. At this point, I was beyond livid. My sister's sense of entitlement had overshadowed decency, and my parents blindly coddled her. I decided to take action. I reached out to a lawyer friend, explaining the situation. While the inheritance issue was murky, I wanted at least a formal statement clarifying that I had never agreed to any arrangement regarding the money. Maybe I could claim restitution or threaten legal action for the misappropriation of my inheritance. My friend agreed it was complicated but suggested a strongly worded letter could scare them into stopping their demands. So, we drafted a letter, politely but firmly stating my position. I never consented to giving my share to my sister. I held my parents accountable for misusing the funds and made it clear that if they continued harassing me for more money, I would take legal action. My lawyer friend helped draft a strongly worded letter, stating my position firmly but professionally. We sent it via courier to my parents, copying my sister. The reaction was explosive. My father called me in a rage, accusing me of going too far. My mother sent vile messages, calling me a traitor. My sister took to social media, ranting about how I was tearing the family apart with legal threats. Then, an interesting twist emerged. A family friend who had known about the original inheritance confided in me, saying they had overheard my parents admitting that the $100,000 was meant solely for me, but they gave it all to my sister. This friend offered to be a witness if I pursued legal action. Encouraged, I informed my father that I had proof. He sputtered, backtracked, and accused me of being petty. My mother switched tactics, offering tearful apologies, but they rang hollow. If they truly regretted their actions, why were they still pressuring me to bail my sister out? The final straw came when some extended relatives organized a family gathering. My parents insisted I attend so we could resolve everything. Suspicious but willing to face them, I went. As soon as I arrived, my sister cornered me, her eyes glistening with tears. "Please," she begged. "I need you to pay off my debts. I can't find a job. Dad said you have money saved." She sounded desperate, but I hadn't forgotten how she never once apologized for squandering my inheritance. "No," I said firmly. "That was my money. You lost it. I owe you nothing." Her expression shifted instantly, from pleading to fury. She exploded, screaming that I was destroying her life. My mother jumped in, scolding me for lacking compassion, calling me an ungrateful child. My father tried to intervene, urging calm, but the tension was suffocating. Some relatives stepped in, hoping to mediate. I stayed composed and repeated the facts. My parents took my entire inheritance and gave it to my sister without my consent. She wasted it. Now they wanted me to bail them out again. A hush fell over the room. Everyone turned to my sister, waiting for her denial, but she had none. Instead, she wailed about how it wasn't her fault the business failed. My parents stammered excuses, claiming they thought I would be fine without the money. An older aunt scolded them for their blatant favoritism. Some relatives glared at my sister, calling her selfish. She snapped back, calling me cold-hearted, whining about how she had only been trying to build a future. But no one sympathized. Her entitlement was staggering. Then came the meltdown. My father, his voice shaking with anger, threatened to disown me if I refused to help. Tired of his empty threats, I looked him in the eye and said, "Do what you want." My mother wept, claiming I was punishing them. I calmly responded that they were simply facing the consequences of their actions. The crowd parted, letting me leave. That was the last major conversation I had with them. True to their word, my parents cut me off. My sister, still jobless and drowning in debt, continues complaining about how unfair life is. She even sent me an email, half apology, half demand for money. I never replied. Some relatives see me as the victim. Others stay neutral, not wanting to pick sides. Meanwhile, my parents are struggling financially after pouring everything into my sister's doomed business. Apparently, they expected me to swoop in and save them, but after everything they had done, how could they possibly believe I would? That $100,000 was meant for me. It could have helped me buy a home or further my education. But dwelling on it won't change the past. Maybe, in the end, the real lesson here is that some parents will always favor one child at the expense of another. My parents no longer have a say in my life, and my sister stands alone in the wreckage of her financial disaster. If they ever come knocking for money again, they'll find the door firmly shut. I learned the hard way that sometimes, family can't even be trusted with something as simple as respecting your inheritance.